of all, thanks to everybody for coming. And I know up here in Duluth, this is a relatively nice day, and y'all should all be out riding. So I'm honored that you actually come and listen to me for a few minutes. I'm going to open it up to questions afterwards. So I'm really looking forward to some interesting questions that make me think about things I don't normally think about. Now, where did Andy go? Andy, how many of you guys here know Andy? So you know that amongst all of his other traits, he's a planner, and he wanted Cheryl and I to come up 5 years ago for the last rally. Well, we were already booked. I don't know exactly what time of year you got a hold of us, but we were already booked. And I said, well, you know, we'll be there for your next one. He says, and it ain't going to be till 2023. And I've still got that email, Andy. I said, you know, 5 years is a long time in fighter pilot years. And I'm going to be 66, but I should still be able to be riding and still be able to still be speaking. And I'll be darned if it didn't happen. So here we are. And, you know, the majority of my public speaking, in fact, just about all of it is done in the K through 12 public school system, private school system here in the U.S. and around the world, actually. And we talk to kids. Motorcycling kind of enters into that discussion, but it's a lot of work for me, but I truly love it when I encounter a customer that makes me go outside my comfort zone. And Andy, Cheryl and I have been doing this for 20 years, and it doesn't happen very often, but this is a brand new presentation that's never been shown before. And actually, it was really fun because I know that you guys want to hear about the similarities between the passion that you have for your sport, and then what happens in high-performance military aviation and indeed even space flight. And I think after this presentation, you guys are going to realize that there's a heck of a lot more similarities between these two endeavors than you ever dreamed about. Now, that was a great introduction, and Andy talked about some of my qualifications as a pilot and as an astronaut. But in this audience, I have to take a minute to establish my bona fides when it comes to riding motorcycles. I've got about 375,000 miles on motorcycles at this point in my life. I've been riding since I was age 11 and pretty steady. I took 3 years off when we were stationed overseas in Europe, and I couldn't get my motorcycle through customs. And then we're undergoing a drought right now because of COVID. We quit riding during COVID, and I haven't gotten back with it. That's why Andy wanted to make me Rider of the Month, and I said, Andy, I can't take that away from somebody who's still riding. So motorcycles have been essential to who I am and the success that I've been able to have. There's my motorcycle credibility. This is, I don't know how well you can see it. This is North America, all the roads we've been on. Not all. Cheryl, I haven't updated this map in about 20 years. So why haven't you gotten after me? Some of my riding was done, most of it was in North America. But for 2 years, my wife and I were stationed in South Korea back in the 80s when South Korea was still emerging from third world status, and the riding out there was priceless. Those are memories I will never, ever forget. And and Cheryl's been one of the main inspirations for my motorcycling because she likes it better than I do, to tell you the truth. I love it, and she can't live without it. So let's talk about real quick about the most exciting 8.5 minutes that I've ever experienced. And that was the 8.5 minutes it took me to go from a standstill on a launch pad in Florida to get to orbital velocity where we could shut off our engines and not fall back to Earth. That's how fast we were going in a mere 8.5 minutes. As you saw, the title of this talk is Riding to the Stars from Mini Bikes to Mach 26. Mach 26, 26 times the speed of sound is how fast we were going after 8.5 minutes when this monster finally ran out of fuel. And let's take a look. Now, during the 2 hours I spent on the launch pad waiting for everything to get loaded up, and all the non-astronaut personnel, they have to have time to get miles away from the launch pad because this thing is basically a bomb, you guys, when it's sitting on the launch pad. And you got 7 crazy astronauts sitting on top of it, and everybody else leaves town. So your thoughts are going around, And I'm thinking, you know, some of this experience kind of reminds me of riding. Right away, the first sensation is, oh my God, I'm on top of a 3-engine, supercharged, old-school Harley drag bike. And this thing is vibrating, and it's got smoke, and it's got stink, and it's got fire. And the vibration and the power, there's no way you can simulate this in the simulator. This is happening, and it's real. 30 seconds after liftoff, we went through those clouds, and we're breaking the first Mach. Okay? You heel over, and you start to attain horizontal velocity. 2.5 minutes after liftoff, the solids come off, and now you're riding those 3 main engines on back of the orbiter. Those things take liquid fuel and they gobble it. They guzzle it at the rate of an Olympic-sized swimming pool every 30 seconds. That's how fast prop is going through that. And you switch from a supercharged Harley drag bike to pure, unadulterated gold wing power. It gets smooth. It gets smooth. Can you guys see me here? It gets smooth and it gets quiet. And the power, miles and miles of power. Right about 7 minutes into the ascent, the engines actually have to start throttling back. Otherwise, it'll break apart anything that the acceleration will tear apart whatever you're carrying in the payload bay. So you've attained 3 Gs of linear acceleration before the engines start to throttle back because you're getting low on fuel and you're getting lighter. 3 Gs of acceleration, you guys. You know what that means? That means for every second that goes by, you're going 65 miles an hour faster than you were the second before. And the Machs are clicking by every 10 seconds. And then all of a sudden, 8.5 minutes after liftoff, all of a sudden, right before the engines totally run out of fuel, liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, 2 of the most savage elements in the world when they come together, produces nothing but energy and steam. Okay, and there's a lot of it. The engine's cut off, and you go from 3 Gs of acceleration to poof. All of a sudden, you're at 0 gravity. And it actually makes you feel like you're floating toward the ceiling. But during that ascent, I'm thinking Goldwing, I'm thinking Harley drag bike, and I'm thinking things are happening so fast, I can barely keep up with them. How many of you guys have been in that place on a motorcycle? Things start to happen a little fast and you can barely, and the only thing you've got, the only reason you're here right now is the experience that you got beforehand somehow that gets you through these moments. So just in that 8.5 minutes of exhilaration and terror, there's a lot of similarities there. Let's drill down more about some of my personal bikes and some of my personal aircraft. Not stuff that I've owned, but stuff that I flew. Like I told Andy before the presentation, academically and in life, I got off to a real slow start. And it took me several years after high school to finally decide I thought it would be cool to fly fighter jets. But at that point, I was already by the time I started college, I'd been riding for 10 years. And I'd met Cheryl a few years before that, and we had done a lot of touring. I probably had maybe over 100,000 miles of riding before I even started college. It was a few years after high school. But when I first started out, when I was age 11, my stepdad came home with a couple of these Honda CT70s. You guys who's ever ridden these bikes? It's the bike that launched a million careers, okay? Now, anyone that's ever ridden these little mini bikes know that they're underpowered and they're fairly easy to operate. But you know, those little wheels they don't handle as well as a big bike. And these little mini bikes will teach you real quick how to respect a single track vehicle. As a matter of fact, that little mini bike was the one that taught me what happens when you're zinging down a dirt road at 30 miles an hour and you grab that front brake as hard as you can. Why would I do that? One answer, 11 years old. Okay, you learn these things. So, fairly simple to operate, but not real forgiving. And it teaches you, Honda had this saying several years ago, Andy remembers this, stupid hurts. And you learn a valuable lesson as a young man, stupid hurts. And this follows you throughout your whole life. Now, when I was in my early 20s, Air Force ROTC decided I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I'm struggling through college. But the cool thing, I think I was about 23 or 24 years old. The Air Force sent me out to Anoka, little airport down there in Anoka in the Twin Cities, to get 25 hours in a Cessna 152, just to see if I liked to fly, and if the Air Force thought that I had some proclivity toward it. They don't want to waste money on people that are never going to get the hang of flying. Now, this little Cessna 152, just like the mini bike, she's pretty underpowered, but she's got that big old wing, which means it flies pretty easy. But that big old wing and that light weight means that if you're coming back to land and it's a gusty day, you've got your hands full. And wind gusts affect that thing a lot more than they affect the rather heavy high-performance fighters that I was flying later on in my career. But just as the mini bike was, fairly easy to operate, fairly easy systems, but I'd say my main takeaway from the Cessna 152 was, first of all, the confidence that I could fly, period. But the second was, when an airplane starts to get a little bit too much to handle, sometimes you just have to let the design do what it's supposed to do. How many of you folks, I can think of a time several years ago, Cheryl, this is what I was afraid of, and this is why you need to keep me from going too long, because I'm going to tell stories. So several years ago, I'm riding my ST-1100 in February through the Rocky Mountains. You're going, Digger, that's crazy. That shouldn't be riding. Well, the roads were dry, and I was just coming back from Las Vegas trying to get back to Colorado Springs. Going up over Wolf Creek Pass, you guys, I'm sure we got some long-distance riders. When you're on the west side, you go up over, but when you're coming back on the east side, there's a tunnel or two. Okay, they just had a blizzard up there about a week before that, and the roads are dry. And all of a sudden I roll out and I'm on my ST-1100 and the tunnel comes up and I can see just enough that there's about a 15-foot slab of thick ice in the tunnel because the sun doesn't hit it. And exactly like I learned in that 152, when things start to get squirrely, you have to trust the machine. And what I did with my ST was I backed off on the throttle. Luckily it was straight. I backed off on the throttle and I asked exactly nothing of the motorcycle as we crossed that ice. And it was a non-event. But, you know, without the experiences of flying and the experience of riding all those years, and Andy, I've done quite a bit of riding, and Andy knows that after a fresh snow, it's not bad. It gets bad when those damn cars come and pack the snow down. So, you know, I had some experience with that, but that's why I'm here. You know, these lessons we learn. And you guys know, you get into a tight spot, your instincts have to take over. Sometimes you have to let your motorcycle do what it wants to do. Cheryl's giving me the hurry up signal. The second motorcycle I bought was a Can-Am 175. And by the way, you guys, you know, I grew up in the projects in St. Paul, and by the time my mom married my stepdad, we still didn't have much money. So all these motorcycles, these are not given to me. I bought all these. In high school, I bought a Can-Am 175. Some of you folks might remember them. Had a little bit of an evil handling beast because of the suspension, but it was fast. And this is my first street legal bike, and I learned a lot from that. I got a lot more experience riding in off-road and riding the motorcycle fast. And I raced an Enduro, just one Enduro. That's all I had the money for back then. And Enduros are hard, aren't they? It's hard riding, but it's fun as hell. And I didn't do that well. There's a story there you could ask me about after. There's a story about all this stuff. When I got into military aviation, we went through pilot training. And when I was in college going through ROTC, I became aware of an airplane called the A-10. And I wanted to fly that. I wanted to fly an A-10. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And when we went through pilot training, Cheryl was there and we worked real hard. And sure enough, the Air Force honored me by giving me a slot to fly an A-10. And just as this was my first real motorcycle, so to speak, that was my first real fighter. And just as I had raised a lot of hell as a 16 and 17-year-old on that Can-Am, some stuff we probably shouldn't talk about, I raised a lot of hell in that fighter jet too, and Cheryl knows some of these stories, and sometimes she says, I can't believe you're still here. But no, this was my dream fighter, does close air support. It exists for one reason, and that's, do we have any folks here got any infantry experience, Marines, Army, anything like that? When you're infantry and you're on the ground and the world starts to go to hell, I know this from my son who served outside the wire in Afghanistan. He said, Dad, when your world's crashing in, there's only one thing that's going to get you out alive, and that's air. And that's what the A-10 does. When it's guys on the ground are having a hard time, the A-10 comes in and changes their whole outlook. This right here is a 30 millimeter Gatling gun, 7 barrels, 30 millimeters. It makes a 30-06 round look like a little BB. The 30 millimeter Gatling gun, and that thing torques out 70 rounds per second. Each round has the explosive power of a hand grenade. How would you like to be bad guys on the ground? And we were the only aircraft capable of actually hitting bad guys if they were within half a football field of the good guys. That's how accurate we were. You had to get your story straight before you pulled the trigger and figure out who was good and bad, but that's what I lived to do. I wanted to help those guys. And I had so much fun in the Air Force. What's the similarity between a motocross bike and a glider? Well, when I got to Edwards Air Force Base, later on in my career to be a test pilot, we were talking, Andy, I was talking to one of your friends about being a test pilot. You get to fly all different kinds of airplanes. That's the idea, to give you experience, because you're going to be testing new ones. Well, the Air Force thought it was important that their test pilot students got a lot of glider time. Didn't quite understand why. At the same time, we're living in Edwards Air Force bases in the Mojave Desert. Guess what, you guys? We had a motocross track on base. So quite naturally, I jumped in my pickup truck and went down to the LA basin and picked up a 1990 YZ250 that had been sitting in the warehouse for about a year, and I raced that guy for several years. Wasn't real fast. I do have some trophies. People think I was faster than I really was. But, you know, I had to work. I had to work Monday morning. And motocross and gliding. You know, Andy, it was probably a couple years into my motocross career that I started to realize that if you consider motorcycling to be like a tree, and you've got all the branches, you got your touring riding, you got your dual purpose, you got your adventure bikes, you get scooters, all the different branches of the tree, the trunk of that tree, how many folks have a decent amount of motocross experience in here? The trunk of that tree, and I'm here to tell you, you're probably going to think I'm lying, this is the way I see it, is motocross. Motocross encompasses every skill you're ever going to need on a motorcycle. My brother just told me yesterday that the finest MotoGP racers in the world, the ones that race the bikes that cost $1 million, they train on motocross bikes. Why is that? Motocross is the trunk of the motorcycling tree. Those years I spent riding motocross made me such of a better street rider. Motocross is the definition of traction crisis all around the track. Traction crisis. And we all know what that means to a motorcycle. Gliding, as I discovered as a test pilot, really got into the philosophical aspects of flying jets. Gliders are the trunk of the aircraft tree. They are flying gliders is flying in its purest sense, just like motocross is riding in its purest sense. Gliders are difficult. If you make a mistake in gliders, it's just like when you make a mistake on a motocross bike, you're going to pay a price. Everybody knows you made a mistake. It's evident to everyone. You can't hide mistakes in a glider. You can't hide mistakes on a motocross bike. A lot of similarities here, folks. Flying and motorcycles. Let's talk about these beauties. I told a little ST-1100 story. When I was at NASA, Cheryl, did you convince me to sell the old Goldwing? We had had a GL1100 that I bought here in St. Paul as in college. I put a Vetter fairing on it, and it had the Honda Samsonite luggage bags. You guys remember them? Kind of a sweet little rig I had. We put 125,000 miles on that bike, and I never felt like I was lacking for power. Sometimes I was lacking for range and suspension and stuff. Like Cheryl loved that bike. She was so comfortable on it, and we knew it so well. 125,000 miles. Well, when we were at Edwards, when we were in Houston, maybe it was you or me decided, let's get a new bike. So we sold the old Goldwing and we got an ST-1100, and that's when I finally found the motorcycle that fit my riding style better than anything I've ever touched. Just because I love the comfort of it, I love the versatility, I love the fact that you can tour all day in comfort and treat it like a Goldwing, or you can raise a little bit of hell on the twisties and the bike is fine. It's not a race bike, okay? But it comports itself well when the roads get twisty. And what I really liked about it, when you're doing serious riding out west, it helps to have a big gas tank. I've actually, on my ST, and I still have it, have gotten over 400 miles on a tank of gas more than once with that thing. And if you throttle back a little bit and you take it easy, this thing's got some legs, and I enjoyed riding. Here's the sad thing. My wife, after we took our first long ride, she said, we got to do something, because she doesn't like the back seat and all that kind of stuff. She wanted her gold. She wanted that gold wing back. Okay, F-16. Compared to the A-10, there's a sleek-looking fighter. The pointy end is in the front, like it should be on a fighter, and it's fast. The ST doesn't set any records for acceleration, but it's plenty fast for me. But let me tell you about this F-16. So the Air Force gave me the opportunity after several years in the A-10 to switch aircraft and go fly an F-16. This is the fighter that got me through the Gulf War. I served during Desert Storm, the first Gulf War, flew 30-some-odd combat sorties, led missions down to Baghdad, et cetera, in the F-16. This is the girl that brought me back from combat safely, and I love that jet. I actually later on became an F-16 test pilot. Now let me tell you about this thing, and you guys are motorcycle people, so you're going to like this. Clean F-16 with no external fuel tanks. You're sitting on the runway, and you don't go to afterburner with the brakes on to check your engines, because the brakes aren't going to hold that. So you run it up to military power, you check your engines, release the brakes, and you go full blower. You've got the airplane at that point weighs probably just over 25,000 pounds, but the torque off the back, that's 25,000 pounds of thrust. Okay? So, a mile and a half after brake release, I'm about to hit the Mach. I'm cleaned up, the gear's up, and I'm watching that airspeed indicator, and it's getting close to a mile and a half after brake release. It's getting close to 600, and you pull her back about 4 Gs, and you stand it on its tail. You stay engaged with full afterburner. You climb vertically for 5 miles. And then you roll out at the top and you continue on with your business, and you take a deep breath and you go, man, that was frickin' cool. Never has this airplane ever disappointed me when it came to thrust. It was a beast. Not like the space shuttle, but it was, this thing got out of town. And, but unlike the ST, which handles for miles, I think the bike handles really well. I've always liked the suspension. I've kept it in stock. But the F-16 was a powered machine, but she's a little bit of an evil handler. And I didn't realize this till a few years later when I was a test pilot and I had a chance to fly all different kinds of airplanes. And I jumped back in this one and I said, whoa, man, wait a minute. I flew this thing for 1,500 hours, and this will kill you pretty quick. And so, some similarities there. But I love the F-16. Once again, I got about 1,500 hours in the A-10, about 1,500 hours in the F-16. And this is the guy. This is the lady that brought me back from combat safely. Let's talk about the Gold Wing and the space shuttle. I left NASA at the end of '04. I'd flown to space one time, and there's a rather convoluted story about why I didn't stay longer, but Cheryl and I go back a long, long time, and we made promises to each other when we were young, dumb teenagers, but we kept those promises. And one of them was to get out of the regular job business and get in doing other things at a certain time in our lives, and it was just time to go. So I flew one time, flew a mission to the Hubble Space Telescope, and as you might imagine, that's got a rather, I think, incredible backstory to it that I was on that mission. But our Gold Wing, now Cheryl's back to, she's on the Queen's Perch, and she loves that. She actually, I consider this to be her bike, and I'm just the driver. She loves being back there. And you guys, Cheryl had a BMW RT 100 for many, many years in California and then in Houston, and she's quite an accomplished rider. You had a Silver Wing, a GL 500 before that. She's got, I don't know how many miles under her belt. So when we ride together, when we tour, she's not totally passive. She's part of the team. We communicate, we don't like the intercoms and stuff, but we communicate with the kind of signals that tank drivers have. the observer and the guy that taps the shoulders, we communicate, and we ride together, and we put a lot of miles on that bike. That's probably got about 80,000 miles on it at this point.
Did you ever get this signal around front end?
All the time. You guys, passengers in the audience, in the early days, Cheryl used to do needlepoint on the back of our motorcycles, and more primitive motorcycles without the good fairings and everything, and sometimes, and the most terrifying thing I could ever hear was, "I lost the needle." Well, the needle's on the end of a thread, okay, so it didn't hit the road, it's somewhere. And that's when you just get kind of still, waiting for her to find the needle. You used to read novels back there. Sometimes she'd get off the map and help us. But anyways, the Goldwing is smooth. We don't do a lot of freeway riding now. We don't do a lot of freeway, like a lot of you folks. We don't do a lot of freeway riding. And she's fine on the back roads. The suspension could be better, but it's comfortable. It's a long-distance smooth machine. Speaking about long-distance smooth machines, by the time you get past the 8.5 minutes of terror and you get to space, when you're in space, everything's smooth. You're just ballistic. You're going around the world, and there's no thrust or anything like that. You're floating inside the machine. But that guy there goes around the world every 90 minutes. And Andy, I think later on in my bio, it says something like that. One of my dreams is to do what Dr. Fraser has done several times, to ride our motorcycles around. We got a couple of KLR 650s in the garage that we're working on. Okay, it's gonna. Cheryl says I'm the world's finest, but the world's slowest mechanic. This thing takes you around the world every 90 minutes, and I never forgot when I was in space, I was a motorcyclist, and you know what I was thinking about when I looked out the window? You guys know exactly what I was thinking about. We were 350 miles up. You could barely, if you had binoculars, you could see the straight roads like in Australia and stuff, but I'm thinking, oh, I'd like to ride there. Oh my God, I got to ride there. I mean, that's all I could think of. And, motorcycling is in the blood. Now, I could, if you guys might imagine, I could keep going and going and going. But let me tell you, guys in the audience, this is just for the guys. You remember when you were younger, it was always cool that you liked motorcycles and you knew that chicks dug bikes. Chicks dig jets. But as we've gotten older, I've discovered something even cooler. Kids love jets. Not jets, the kids like motorcycles. I skipped something. You can tell this is the first time I've ever done this. So let's talk about one last thing before we open up the questions, promise. Let's talk about the similarities between riding motorcycles and flying jets. So, Cheryl, you remember this ride. Several years ago, we were doing some gigs in Alabama. And we had done a late morning gig in a high school just southwest of Birmingham, Alabama. And the next morning at 7:30, at 7 o'clock, we had to show up at an elementary school in Alpharetta, Georgia. If you get on the interstate, that's not too bad, but that's not how we roll. So after languishing too long at a Crystal's hamburger restaurant there, which is one of my favorite foods, we got on the bike and it was time to head toward Atlanta, all back road. Well, you guys, and we're on the Goldwing, fully loaded, all our presentation gear and all that kind of stuff. By the time we got in the Atlanta area, along this tributary road up there, two-lane back in them days, unfortunately it was rush hour. And all the commuters, this is only 25 miles here, so all the commuters were coming home from work. And you guys all know the bane of riding around commuters. They're brain dead. They're brain dead and aggressive, the most dangerous combination there is. So you got to be on your game when you're in that situation. We don't like to put ourselves in this situation, but actually I have to take the blame for that because I was the one that said, let's do a one-day thing. Usually we give ourselves a day for this, but we had to work. This stretch here, all I can remember is that it was nothing but mailboxes and erratic drivers. You're just hyper alert. We've all been there. It took about an hour and a half, a long time through it, and Cheryl's helping out, and we're working together, and everything's clicking. And then it hit me. It hit me getting off the motorcycle just as the sun was going down in the motel parking lot. It hit me. I got off the bike and I kind of leaned against the handlebars and I says,
I feel just like I used to feel after a demanding mission in the F-16 or the A-10. Not physically. Motorcycles are easier on your body physically than the high-performance fighters. Those fighters beat you up. This is why I have 30% VA disability just for my spine. They tear you up. Those of you that saw that movie, that last Maverick movie with Tom Cruise, that's real. Pulling the G's and stuff. They got a lot wrong, but they got that right. I got off the bike and I said, this feels exactly like a demanding mission in F-16. And then it hit me. Riding a motorcycle under demanding conditions, a lot of times that means traffic, makes your brain feel the same way as your brain feels when you're flying fighter jets. It really does. And I know this because I've done both of them at a high level. And I felt the same level of exhilaration, happy to be alive. My brain was buzzing because it had been working so hard, but yet a sense of satisfaction. And you know something else, as you guys know, as Cheryl and I get older, it becomes more and more important for us to get a good night's sleep. That doesn't come the way it used to be when we were younger. But dang, when we're on the road, secondary 2 lanes and stuff like that at the end of a long day, when your head hits that pillow, you sleep. It's not that your body's tired, your brain's had it, and it was exactly like when I was flying fighters. I would come home and Cheryl would say, well, you got nothing left, you're good for nothing. She'd feed me and put me to bed and get me ready for the next day. And that's how it felt. And to me, the main similarity between flying high-performance jets and then doing the kind of riding you guys do, especially in congested conditions and with traffic and stuff where you really have to think hard, is makes your brain, I'm telling you, makes your brain feel the same way. So after your next demanding ride, I don't know if you ever encountered this kind of traffic up here in Duluth, but after your next demanding ride, maybe down the Twin Cities or something, when you're all done with it, go, this is what it feels like to come back after F-16 sortie. I'm telling you, it's the same thing. So I would like to, Andy, you're the boss here, or maybe not. Whoever the boss is, let's open it up to questions and talk about whatever it is that you guys would like to talk about. Cheryl, you want to call out?
Yeah, go ahead. Sometimes he can't hear because of the airport. Yeah, go ahead.
Did you ever experience any malfunctions up in a plane where something didn't work, and
all the time.
All the time?
Well, it seems like in my memory all the time. Most of the flights, we had pretty good maintenance. But I will tell you, as far as malfunctions go, you know, when you're training to fly in space, this guy here, there's, in the engineering community and people that really know, they say this is the most complicated machine that's ever been built by man. And when I was an astronaut pilot, I was a space shuttle pilot, my job was to stay on top of this thing and to keep learning it. You can never learn everything about it, you can just keep trying. And I can truthfully tell you that, at least back in the space shuttle days, I don't know how it is anymore since they're flying capsules, but back in the space shuttle days, after I'd been selected for my mission, and I got that 9 months to train to go up to the Hubble Space Telescope, I'd say a good 98% of my training was how to deal with malfunctions and when things went wrong. That's all you deal with. Because it's not easy, but it's pretty routine when everything's working. But you have to be able to deal with the fact how to get yourself home safely when things aren't working. Now, 4,500 hours of high-performance aviation, I've never had to ride the ejection seat, and I don't even have to knock on wood because I'm not doing that anymore. But so I've been lucky in that respect. But I have lost engines. I have had serious hydraulic emergencies and stuff like that. But you know, your training, the level of training you get in the Air Force or at NASA, your training gets you through. That's all you've got. And for you guys, Andy, several years ago, I don't know if I ever shared this story with you on an email or whatever, but right after we'd gotten the Gold Wing, you know, we traveled back roads, and this was back in the aughts before we had, the phones could tell you where you were going, and actually before I even mounted a magnetic compass on the dashboard, which I have now. We would typically, on a long trip with back roads, thousands and thousands of miles, we would typically get turned around at least once. Well, we got lost Actually, a fighter pilot is never lost. You're just looking for the right vector, okay? Let's say we got turned around on some small county roads in Ohio, and Cheryl says, I don't think we should be going down this way. So I attempted a tight U-turn on the road, and long story short, we tipped over. Brandon Goldwing and tips over, and it was by a hill, so all I can remember is looking at Cheryl, and she's ass over tea kettle rolling down the hill. And I'm thinking, what happened? Well, I never really did. I kind of figured out what happened, and we can talk about that, but you might imagine experienced motorcyclists. We got to the motel that night, and Cheryl's unpacking our stuff, and guess where I am? I'm out in the parking lot doing figure eights and stuff like that. You know, when you have a close call, you need to go after it. You need to figure out what went wrong. And for you guys as experienced motorcyclists, to get back to basics every now and again, maybe some parking lot work, or a lot of people like to do track riding. I never have, I'd really like to. You got to get back to basics. Fighter pilots spend an awful lot of time doing what we call touch and goes. Just flying landing, after go around and do another landing and practicing with the flaps up, flaps down, different configurations. We do that all the time. Same way as when you're riding a motorcycle, you always have to get back to basics. Maybe one thing I do is I give myself swerve exercises where all of a sudden I go debris, and then you train yourself to look where you want to go, and you get the counter steering thing down so that it's automatic. Seems a little ridiculous, but there's one time in your life where you're really going to need that, and that's why you're still here. So that's another thing you can learn between high performance aviation and riding bikes is no matter how experienced you are, you just gotta get back to basics. You gotta do it. Questions? That was a long answer, wasn't it? Oh.
But can I just ask one more question? So when you're training to be a pilot and then you have a catastrophic event, and so you're taking over, you're the human being here. So where do you see AI in this whole thing then? Do you think, I mean, there are a lot of training,
Yeah.
but can you ever replace that human brain to,
Yeah.
has that been discussed at all? Or?
As a matter of fact, when I was a fighter pilot, and I guess an astronaut to a certain extent, I always felt like of all the jobs the military does, one of the first ones that's going to be totally automated is the job I did as a fighter pilot. You know, you get a drone up there that can deliver ordnance and drop bombs and stuff like that. That drone isn't limited at pulling 9 Gs. If you pull much more than 9 Gs in a fighter, which I did all the time, you're going to end up with way worse physical condition than I am here. But the machines can pull 15, 20 Gs. There's no, and that basically means how maneuverable they are and how tight they can turn and the kind of magical stuff they can do when they're flying if you don't have some protoplasm on board that you have to protect, okay? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that I think pilot's job is going to be one of the first ones to go away, especially in terms of commercial aviation. Some of us might be alive when there are no more pilots up front. Maybe there's an engineer or something on the airplane that can kind of help out if something goes wrong, but that's where we're headed.
Would that be commercial first or military first? I mean, already we have drones in the Middle East and all of that sort of thing.
The
right?
flying,
So the commercial side.
commercial flying is way easier for a machine to solve.
Okay,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Now, there is one thing, as a test pilot, I can tell you, and I used to tell the younger test pilots this all the time. I told you that fighter pilots practice and practice and practice touch and goes, you know. Sometimes we spend a whole hour in the pattern just doing it again and again and again. I used to tell some of the younger test pilots when they were testing systems and how they landed and stuff like that, I would say never, ever, ever underestimate the primacy of the landing task. Landing can be damn hard if all of a sudden you get the wrong gust or you got a little problem with the airplane or something like that. So landing, and then a few years after that, when the Air Force really started to experiment with auto land systems and stuff, I was proven correct because that's where the accidents were occurring, was during the landing. I don't want to scare anybody if we get to the point where you're flying commercially and there's no pilots up there, but the landing is, that kind of flying, the landing is where you make your money. Now, military aviation is a lot more complex. Fighting, dropping bombs, getting into a target without being seen, those types of things that really are quite demanding. But we're going to get there. But I think the first thing that's going to happen is commercial aviation is going to become totally automated at some point. And that's probably a good thing. A lot of my friends are going to lose their jobs, but That's okay, they've already made enough money. Questions?
Do you have a best save story, both bike and fire?
A who
A
story?
best save.
Best
With
save.
a motorcycle and a best save in your fighter truck.
Let me talk about the airplane first, because there's a lot of them, but one of them comes to mind, and there's, just hanging around with Andy a little bit. Can you guys hear the philosopher when you're around Andy? I'm sure you have. So, I was flying A-10s in Korea, and I was pretty experienced by then, and so I was an instructor, and I had a wingman with me, and we were doing a lot of ground attack, low altitude ground attack stuff. And here I am talking with my hands again. And the kid was new, and he was doing something I thought was a little odd. Well, I had just dropped a bomb, and I was actually hadn't dropped a bomb. I think I was going down to strafe or something like that, and I had my nose pointed toward the ground. And I felt compelled to look over my shoulder and see where I was worried about him. And the backstory is that just a few weeks before that, Cheryl and I had lost a dear friend that had basically turned an A-10 into a ball of fire, and he never got out. He got killed. And this has happened to us so many times. And a little voice said something about my kids, because Hal loved our kids. He's like a surrogate father. And for some reason, I looked down and I got what pilots call ground rush, where you're getting so low that the view out your window starts to expand real fast. And I gave her everything she had, and I don't know how low I got, but there were some stains in my underwear after that. We think that was Hal that spoke to me. The little voice was my friend. You have to, you almost have to believe these kind of things when you do the kind of stuff Cheryl and I have done. And then on a motorcycle, the only thing, I think it was that same ride. I'll just say, here's one of them. I was on that same ride that I was on when I told you guys about going through the tunnel with the ice. So I did that, and that was okay. And it was getting later on in the day. I'm thinking, do I want to press? I was on the eastern side of the Great Divide, but it was still pretty cold. It was still west of the Front Range, and I'd say the temperature was in the low 20s, high teens, which is fine. I've got electricity. I'm a Minnesota guy. I ride in cold weather. We all do. And so life was good. So I'm zinging down the road. Oh, I know what it was. Right before that, I had stopped in an Indian reservation to have some lunch. And February, it's cold out, and there's some snow, there's snowbanks and stuff like that. While I'm sitting there having lunch, there's a Native American family having lunch at the next table, and the young man, he identified himself as a Ute Brave, the Ute Indians out there. And he came and he said, hi, blah, blah, blah. Where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going on to the Springs. And those of you, Cheryl and I do a lot of work with natives. They're kind of stoic, thoughtful. And he goes, okay. He says, do you mind if I give you a blessing? Well, any experienced motorcycle, you want all the odds in your favor, right? You want to turn down. So I'm sitting there, and he put his hand on my head, and it was about 30 seconds of a chant, real somber and stuff. And I sat there, and I'll take it. But so I'm zinging down the road, kind of wondering if I'm going to press on and go home or stop for the night. And going about 70 miles an hour, the road was straight. And all of a sudden, you guys have all been there, a brown flash, and right in front of me, mule deer are bigger than whitetails, okay? A mule deer runs right out in front of me on the road. I'm on the ST, and instincts took over. I don't have any skid on the bike. 18 degrees out, the rubber is not warm. And I hit the brakes. Luckily the front didn't lock up, but the back locked up, and I slowed down so the thing passed right. I could almost feel the wake as I went by it. And at that point in my life, now I realized, well, I'm not going to the Springs tonight. I'm going to stop. And I stopped and bought a 6-pack of beer and dealt with it. But then I thought back, holy crap, I've just received a huge blessing for a safe trip. You know something test pilots do, you guys? Cheryl thinks this is nuts. I used to tell her, So you see, how many engines in F-16? You know how many? One engine in an F-16. Well, what did you do today, Digger? You say, well, I went out and we were testing out a new kind of aviation fuel, and we don't know how the engine's going to react, so I got airborne and I shut that engine off just to see if I could get it started again. She goes, well, that's awful damn dumb. And I said, yeah, it is dumb. Like I told Andy before, if you're going to do something stupid, you better do it smart. What I didn't tell her was I had spent 20 minutes before that testing all my systems, testing the backup generator system, doing a few practice landings on the dry lake bed in case I had to glide back. It's stacking all the odds in your favor. You guys, when you throw your leg over a bike, whether it's to the corner store or whether it's to the West Coast, you're about to do something stupid. There's a lot safer ways to do what you're fixing to do. So you got to do it smart and stack all the odds in your favor. Doggone it, when you're sitting there and a youth brave offers to give you a blessing, you go, yep, let's do it. I don't know, that's the way I feel. Questions? Andy, we're going to go as long as you guys can stand it. And Cheryl and I are not pressed for time for lunch or anything, so don't worry about it. I love talking about this. Sorry.
Any thoughts or opinions you care to share on the upcoming Artemis missions?
Yeah, I'm all about, first of all, as an astronaut, a lot of people are surprised to hear me say that I am totally 100% behind what Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are doing with commercial space flight. And you got people flying, you got people putting on astronaut pins that didn't have to go through the training that I went through. I love it. The more the merrier. Bring it on. We need thousands of people in this world, if not millions, that have had that experience, because it is a life-changing experience. When we're done today, get on the internet and Google what they call the overview effect. And it's real. Captain Kirk flew in space, as you guys probably know. All he could talk about was the view and how it made him feel and the despair he felt. You'll have to read. He's a professional communicator. So I'm all about commercial space, and I love the fact that it's becoming more routine. Artemis, yeah, we got to get back to the moon, but the way NASA's doing it, and I think it's brilliant. You know, if your goal is to go to Mars and set up colonies on Mars is a hell of a long way away, 6 to 9 months to get there. What happens if you get there and things go to hell? It's like John Young used to say, one of the moonwalkers, one of my friends used to say, you know, Digger, Mars is a long way away, but if things go to hell on the moon, you're only 3 days away from a warm bed and a plate of beans. So guess what? NASA's pretty smart. They're saying if we want to get to Mars, let's practice our stuff. Let the moon be our practice parking lot. Okay? And that's what Artemis is all about. Artemis isn't going to the moon and stopping. Artemis is validating the technologies that we're going to need to go on to Mars. You guys you wouldn't be here riding bikes if you didn't feel the urge to explore. And actually, the urge to explore is part of what makes us unique from the other animals here on Earth. That's what humans love to do. And my goodness, if you take that away, we all stagnate and eventually we perish. So there's only one place left to go, and that's out. And Artemis, to folks that do what Cheryl and I do, Artemis is a great way to share the dream for kids and to motivate them to maybe do what I need to do. Stay awake during those damn math and science classes, okay? Because that stuff is important. That's what we're going to need to go on to Mars and places further. So, yeah, I'm all about Artemis. I'm a little bit disturbed that it's been delayed. Something to think about, folks. There's a pretty good chance, I'd say at least a 30% chance that the Chinese are going to establish a permanent base on the moon before we do. Decide for yourself what you think that means. Questions? Sorry.
UFOs are in the news a lot lately.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on those?
Yeah, I get that question all the time, as you might imagine. There's a TV show out there on the Discovery Science Channel called NASA's Unsolved Mysteries, and I'm featured on one of their shows. Because when I got to space, I saw what appeared to be some type of something that was flying alongside us at 18,000 miles an hour. It didn't make sense. So I took a video of it and we sent it back to the ground, and the ground could never figure out what it was. Because on a shuttle mission, you don't have time for that kind of buffoonery. You got a hell of a lot of work to do. So that kind of came and went. What I'm trying to say is there's an awful lot about what happens during these space missions, and there's an awful lot about what's out there that we can't even begin to understand. This Hubble Space Telescope I told you guys about that I flew to and we refurbished it. The Hubble's really, really cool, but the Hubble's been up there since 1990, and guess what? We have decided that the Hubble has actually opened more questions than it's given us answers. So out there is when I used to get the question, do you believe in aliens? And I'd say mathematically, I believe that they have to be there because the Hubble has showed us how vast the universe is. Not only that, but all these galaxies and stars, it turns out that a lot of them have planets. If not most of them, I don't know, I'm not an astronomer. So you just do the math and you go, well, there's gotta be intelligent life out there somewhere. It's up to debate whether we can be considered intelligent life. There's gotta be out there. Now, what's happening right now is just, and I used to tell people, I say, but the distances are so vast. Everything I've ever seen in my aviation career and in space, I could kind of explain, I could kind of convince myself that it wasn't alien spacecraft. You know, there's a more reasonable explanation for that. But as time goes on, I think I have to, kids ask this question, I have to be able to tell the kids, you know, you guys, there's, let's just say there's an awful lot we don't know. But if you work hard in school and you apply yourself to the subjects that teach you logic and the ability to solve problems, a lot of times that's math and physics and those types of disciplines, you will be able to be the type of mature American that's not going to be fooled by all the rubbish that's out there. You will be able to be a critical thinker, and you will be able to help us make the right decisions when it comes to encountering alien civilizations and stuff like that. Are we prepared right now to encounter a superior alien civilization? I don't know. But you know, we have to get there. This is real. This is real. Questions?
Has it changed the percentage, you know, like Richard Bond was a test pilot. Did a certain percentage die then and it's got less and less and less as time goes on? Being a test pilot?
What?
You know, like Richard Bond after World War II ace, you know, he was a test pilot and died.
Oh, you mean you're talking about the danger?
30% died
Yeah.
at a certain time? But
You're talking about the danger of being a test pilot.
you're right.
Yeah, it's a dangerous profession. And remember I told you that by the time I was a test pilot in the early 90s, I'm going to do engine testing on F-16. I told you all those things. Every single procedure I went through to prepare myself to be ready for shutting off that motor and seeing if it starts again, every single step that I went through, it was there because someone got killed or someone almost got killed.
Right.
So by the time, and we used to say, these lessons are written in blood. Don't skip the steps. They're there for a reason. Military aviation is really like that. There's not much room for fluff. Everything we do to prepare, to train, it's all there for somebody died. And so luckily, by the time I came along, we were getting that much better about the test pilot business, okay?
Yeah.
But back in the 50s, when the Air Force was coming out with the Century Series fighters and the Chuck Yeager days and stuff, those guys were dying wholesale. Anybody, not the movie, read the book, The Right Stuff. Okay, it's real. That's real. A funeral a week. And Cheryl and I mean, it's sad. It weighs you down after a while. We feel the weight of all the friends we've lost, and Lord knows I was sitting in mission control whenever Columbia crashed, and there's 7 of them right on the worldwide TV. That's me in mission control, supposed to help them. You know, you got to work your way through that kind of stuff. But you know, if you have a passion for it, we probably all lost friends on motorcycles. I know that I have, and we one of the most recent ones, my Uncle Denny, Harley rider. Cheryl and I were working. Mike Cole. Yeah. Did you know Mike? Yeah, just the friends you've lost. What Cheryl and I did that day when we found out that my uncle had passed, and I've just been riding with him the last 6 months, something like that. We just, it was in the morning in the motel, we were working, and you get on the bike and you go, I'm going to dedicate this ride to Uncle Denny. You know, you just never forget. And maybe you try to learn something from the riders that have passed.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe the way they passed or something could teach you a lesson, but you gotta take all that with you. And after all, you guys know, that's one of the bitches of growing old. You just, things start to pile up, but motorcycles help you get through that, because when you're undergoing a difficult ride like that one north of Atlanta, your brain's not thinking about Uncle Denny, okay? Your brain's thinking about the task. And I think that's really healthy for us to be able to do that, to really become focused and not let those other thoughts run away, but there's no time for that. And we all like the feeling of being in the zone. And you get in the zone in fighter jets, and you get in the zone when you're on a difficult ride too. It's the same thing. Same dang thing. Sir.
Tell us the story of how you got to be named Digger.
Should I lie or should I tell the truth? So this is how it was. You folks that have been in the military know that part of the way the military fosters a competitive spirit during peacetime is you compete against other units that you're stationed with. And in my day, it was fighter squadrons, and you would compete with the other fighter squadrons to see who was the best. But there's a real competition in the Air Force between different aircraft communities. And I grew up in the A-10, and there's not many of us that flew the A-10 that went on to fly the F-16. But the Air Force gave me that opportunity. That's one cool thing about being in the military is you can do a career like I did, 22 and a half years, and have 3 or 4 different jobs. And you don't lose any seniority, your paycheck keeps going up. So I flight A-10s for a while, and then the Air Force gave me the opportunity to fly F-16s off to Arizona to learn how to fly, and then we were stationed in Spain. So when I got to my unit in Spain, my call sign, my nickname in A-10s was Spider, because we play, you guys probably don't know anything about this, but fighter pilots, when they have a pool table, they don't play pool. They play a game called crud that doesn't involve pool sticks, and that's about as far as I'm going to go, okay? But I was known for it because I was, a little thinner and agile. I was known to scramble across the table so I could get a better shot. And, dude, looks just like a spider. And that was my call sign. A lot of times you earn your call signs outside the jet. You earn them at the bar or something like that. So I show up in Spain, and it's A-10 guy, huh? No one had any respect for the A-10. It's too slow for the F-16 guys. And I go, yeah, what about it? What's your call sign? And I go, they call me Spider. Nah, that's not going to work. And some little slimy little lieutenant, I was a captain. Some slimy little Gus, little guy, comes up. We're going to call you Digger. And I said, I hate that name with every fiber of my being. And then it wasn't a little guy, it was the squadron commander, a large man. Comes up and puts his beefy arm around me, and I looked up, he goes, how you doing, Digger? And that was it, she calls me Digger now. It's just the way it is, all these calls, and when you guys watch the Maverick movie and stuff like that, most call signs are not cool. If you have a cool call sign, your friends are going to take it away from you real quick. If you think your call sign is going to be killer, at the end of the day, you're going to be known as Fluffy. Okay? That's just the way it is. There's a lot of, in the fighter pilot world, there's a lot of fear, sarcasm, and ridicule. And this idea of nurturing somebody and bringing them along and making them feel comfortable. No, it's not like that. And you know why it's not like that? Because when a new wingman comes into the squadron, you don't have time to screw around with this kid or this young lady, because, tomorrow, she might be on your wing, responsible for keeping the MiGs off your tail. So you got to get them up to speed real fast, and there's a lot of fear, sarcasm, and ridicule. Questions? I loved that world. You guys can tell, if I wasn't on tape right now, you guys can tell I want to swear really bad. Actually, to tell you the truth, you know why NASA, I think they still do this. Any pilot that NASA hires to fly in space is always a test pilot. And you know why I figured out why that is? It isn't because we're awesome pilots. But to be a test pilot, you come out of fighter pilot world, you become a test pilot. Well, you're not surrounded by military people anymore. You're surrounded by civilian contractors, engineers with thick glasses who are really, really smart. And they don't understand swears. They need that to come up their ass. And so test pilot, being a test pilot is like a halfway home for other pilots. And by the time we get to NASA, we can do a whole talk without a single swear. I'm telling you how it is. Questions?
You've been going a little over an hour now, and I think if there's no more questions, I want to tell you how grateful I am, and I think everyone in this room is so grateful for your speech and your talk and your questions and your stories and your service. Thank you.
I just
Yeah,
want,
thank you for your service.
it was an honor, every minute of it. I just want everybody here to understand that the riding that you guys do, maybe you go watch the Maverick movie and you say, geez, that would be cool. You know, as far as your brain concerned, as far as your brain is concerned, you're probably about halfway there on a demanding ride. I'm telling you, it's the same thing. Took me years to discover that, but it's true. So thanks for listening, especially thanks for coming on a nice riding day. And y'all, like I say in my emails sometimes to Andy, ride hard but ride safe, okay? You only got one chance. So you guys enjoy it, and thank you very much for listening.